नालंदा लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल के पहले एडिशन में आप सभी लोगों का स्वागत है। मैं पंकज दुबे हूं, आई एम द फेस्टिवल क्यूरेटर ऑफ नालंदा लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल। सबसे पहले आज के सेशन और पूरे फेस्टिवल के चीफ गेस्ट और आज के सेशन के स्पेशल गेस्ट, प्रोलिफिक स्कॉलर, ऑथर, पार्लियामेंटेरियन डॉक्टर शशि थरूर जी का हम स्वागत करते हैं। लेट्स वेलकम डॉक्टर शशि थरूर जी। Also, I welcome the moderator for today's session, prolific Vice Chancellor of Nalanda University, Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi ji. ज़्यादा औपचारिकताओं में नहीं पड़ते हुए, I request the festival director गंगा कुमार जी के हम लोग पुष्प गुच्छ से हमारे एमिनेंट स्पीकर, मॉडरेटर दोनों लोगों का स्वागत करें। And will not get into more formalities, don't worry, we'll straight away start the session. I request Smita ji and और फिर से स्वागत। Let's clap guys. Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi ji, Vice Chancellor, Nalanda University. Thank you, Ganga Kumar ji, Smita ji. All of you are requested not to switch off your mobile phone. आप vibration में डालीजिए, and you can take it later. Also, we'll really admire if you don't continue with your conversation, which I can still hear. और मैं ज़्यादा औपचारिकताओं में पढ़ना नहीं चाहता। इतने prolific speakers, authors हमारे साथ हैं अपने insightful discussion के लिए। Let's go straight to the point. I request Professor Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi ji to start the session. See you all later. We'll have some Q&A after this before we finish. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Good morning to everyone. Warm welcome to this very stimulating session with Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Honorable Member of Parliament. Friends and colleagues, his commentaries, his tweets, his writings, his interactions, and also his commentaries outside India have provoked many minds. They have provoked many thoughts in terms of both bringing forward the kind of challenges that the society has, the kind of efforts which are needed in terms of streamlining, but also sometimes with a lot of resentment. Extremely provocative, extremely considerate, and very warm-hearted person. Warm welcome to this conversation.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to be here over the last couple of days, and seeing this university flourishing is something that gladdens the heart of every Indian, I'm sure. But certainly, as you and I discussed, I had written about this 20 years ago in the Hindu when the idea was announced for the first time. And to see it real and functioning and flourishing and now hosting a major literary festival is particularly satisfying.
Thank you. And I think there are a couple of issues that I have thought of raising with you and getting your commentary, given the fact that you have such diverse field of specialization, working, and also focus. First and foremost, Shashiji, I would very much like to sort of request for something when you ended this 2006 piece on your expectations from Nalanda. And I would very much like to extrapolate that to bring forward issues which are there from 2020 NEP, the new education policy. How you look at issues which, as I mentioned to you the other day, in terms of the distance between humanities and social sciences, which Nalanda centuries ago tried to address. The idea of ecology, which always existed in Indian thought process, the NEP has tried to address. How you view Indian universities playing a global role. You have yourself played that role in a different setting in the UN in New York, and later on now as chair of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Ministry of External Affairs. You have been seeing the kind of narratives which are coming out, which are anti-India. I don't want to refer to Bangladesh, but multiple such challenges, minor, major, all kinds of things. Do you see any role that universities can play in that context?
Very much so, Sachin, if I may call you that. Let me just say that to begin with, there's no doubt in my mind that when you look at the history of Nalanda, it literally was the world's leading university when it existed, because there wasn't very much competition, but also because it truly was an extraordinary accomplishment. Can you think back, you're looking at 1600 years ago almost, in 2 years it'll be the 1600th anniversary of the founding of this university. And in that era, to have conceived such an extraordinary multidisciplinary set of studies in one place, with all aspects having been taken care of, where the revenue of 200 villages around had sufficient knowledge to merit admission, they were admitted. That was the entire admission process. And when they came, they learned not just, as people initially wrongly assumed, because it was a Buddhist institution, they didn't just come here to study Buddhist scriptures. They studied everything: mathematics, astronomy, Professor Chaturvedi said, practical sciences, including agriculture. They looked at various aspects of the interrelationship of human beings with the cosmos and with the planet. And at the same time, of course, it was organized very much as a Buddhist monastery would be. They had the world's tallest and most significant library, in 9 stories tall library. Now, all of this we know because of records of people who visited at that time. Twice it was destroyed by envious marauders. Twice it was rebuilt. The third destruction, sadly, turned out to be the longest lasting, because when it was destroyed in the late 12th century by Bhaktiar Khilji, at that time, it is said that the fires of the library and of the monastery burned for so many days, and the guide showed me yesterday, you could still see some of the marks of the fire on the bricks remaining. And after all of that, it's a matter of great satisfaction that just about little over 800 years after that destruction, we have been able to re-establish Nalanda University, not on the exact site, because that is an extraordinarily, an archaeological ruin of historic interest. So that site will remain a site for the original place and for the ruins there. And it's, if you haven't, I'm sure all of you here have visited it, but for me, as someone who hadn't visited it, it was an extraordinary feeling to walk there. But having said that, Dr. Chaturvedi is quite right in bringing the conversation to the 21st century. We no longer boast any of the world's leading universities. There are various world rankings of universities in which we don't, for the longest time we didn't feature anywhere in the top 200. Now in recent years, a handful of our institutions, mainly the IITs, the Indian Institute of Science, have made it to the top 200, but not in a very high position, not in the top 10, or to the best of my recollection, not even in the top 50. So we have still a very long way to go in the world's eyes. Whereas Nalanda attracted students from as far west as Turkey and Persia, as far east as Thailand and Korea, as far north as Japan. We today are not, let's face it very honestly, a lodestar for international education. When I was at university, we had a number of foreign students from Africa and elsewhere. The number of students as a percentage of the student body has actually declined. And the number of foreign students as a percentage of India's student bodies have actually declined since my days as a student. So we are losing out in the process. I mean, I can tell you with pride, meeting African presidents and prime ministers and foreign ministers during my service at the UN, who had graduated from Indian universities, and we had that in common, and it was part of our soft power that they could look back on their year studying at Delhi University or whatever and talk about it with affection. Today there are very few of those, because the next generation after that didn't come so much to India. They went to the West, or in some cases to Russia. Now, what can we do about that? You mentioned the NEP. It's very laudable. In fact, I must say that this is one bill which, unlike some of the more recent bills we've been reading about in the papers, actually did involve a lot of consultation, not in the formal process, which was unfortunate. To this day, there hasn't been a formal structured parliamentary debate on the NEP. But what happened was, when the draft bill was first written, at that point Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank was the education minister. He circulated it to MPs, or at least selected MPs, and invited them to come for consultations. I think only 6 or 8 of us went. I was one of them. And after that conversation in that larger forum, I said to him that I'd like to talk to him in greater detail. And he invited me to his office. I thought I'll get 15, 20 minutes and I'll give him some nuts and bolts. What I went thinking I'll have 15, 20 minutes turned out to be a detailed 2 hour conversation. And a number of my suggestions, concerns, questions, and objections were taken into account in the draft that came out later. So I do believe this time the government understood they were formulating a policy for the nation and not for a party or a government. And that was really, in many ways, one of the reasons why I've been, by and large, supportive of it. You frame the question in the context of whether the NEP can make Indian universities a major force in the world, and there I think we still have a long way to go. I think aspirations are very important. We should certainly have aspirations, but we need to first walk before we can run. And we do need to get a lot more of the basics right across our campuses. Still, the NEP actually is in better shape when it comes to university education, in that its concepts are right. The opportunity to be multidisciplinary in your studies, as you said, rightly borrows from Nalanda's approach of more than 1,000 years ago. But that is something which I think will enhance our appeal globally. We still don't have enough provision for internationalization, largely because our own domestic demand vastly outstrips supply, and particularly in many subjects like medicine and so on. I mean, I remember when I became minister in the External Affairs Ministry, the Mauritius government complaining that for many years in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you used to reserve 6 places in your medical colleges for Mauritian students. Now there are none. And I said I would look into it because medical education doesn't come under the HRD or now Education Ministry. But I went back to Delhi and inquired, and sure enough, they said, how can we give 6 places to foreigners when we have so many Indians who can't get in? And they're right. I mean, it's a genuine challenge. But that's why it becomes so much of a problem for us to have unrealistic international or global aspirations just now. We still need to be able to meet Indian demand, maximize our supply, as it were, create more institutions, and so on. By the way, the NEP has been less successful, I think, at the school level. I know this is not the concern of this particular audience. I won't go into great detail, but a couple of issues that have been bothersome have been undoubtedly the concern about the fact that some of the more lofty aspirations of the NEP at the school level require resources, and this government is silent on where those resources are coming from. So when the Prime Minister makes a speech, very rightly saying that I want children to be able to study both music and mathematics. Okay, but in mathematics you need a blackboard and a teacher and some chalk. That most schools have, right? I certainly hope they do. But when it comes to music, you need a dedicated room or more than one. You need a whole number of instruments. Each musical instrument needs a different teacher. All that costs money. And who's going to pay for that? That's the real question which the NEP is silent on. And frankly, both when it comes to schools and colleges, when it comes to broader issues of research as well, we need far more resources than we are devoting currently. We have had an ambition of 3.6% of GDP for education going back to the 1960s when it was officially announced in the Kothari Commission report. Today we're still only at 2 point something. When it comes to research, by the way, we have 17% of the world's brains. Okay, but we produce just 2.7% of the world's research output. And we are somewhere like 49th or 56th or something in the rankings of patent applications filed per head of population. So we are long from being where we should be in a world leader. Part of the problem again is resources. Everything we depend on the government has finite resources. It's our taxpayers' money they're spending. But if you look at the OECD countries, 75 to 80% of the expenditure on research comes from the private sector. Whereas in India, the private sector will not spend a penny on research. They'd much rather spend it on sales and advertising and promotion and marketing. They're not interested in actually spending the resources required in research. And therefore, this has become a genuine challenge for us. And this is why I said, Sachin, that we really have a long way to go before we can ever create an institution or institutions that rival Nalanda. What Nalanda was in the world 1200 years ago, I'm afraid we are not quite 1200 years, I hope, but at least 20 or 30 years away from being able to create an institution that can have that kind of appeal to the world's intellectual classes.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you have raised multiple issues. Several of them can be captured for further discussion. But I was thinking to take this conversation in two different but interlinked directions. One certainly is this whole idea of preparedness of our students. One is, of course, the Indian institutions responding to the changes at the global level. But for students, how you see this changing global scenario? In your work, the less you preach, the more you learn. You have tried to bring forward this transiency that is there at the global level. You have described it in form of how the idea of stable careers, they are changing, in what way students should visualize their future, how they should see what kind of options they have. So the challenge is at two levels. One, Indian universities preparing themselves for a global role, attracting students from outside. But second is to prepare their own students for the new world which is coming up. How you see this, where resources do not matter so much. Now, as you have seen in Bangalore and in many other cities, private funded universities are multiplying. Some of them are setting very high standards.
And charging very high fees.
And charging very high fee, that's also true, but some of them are quite fair-minded. I don't want to name, but there are some very good philanthropists who are contributing to this area. Some entities under leadership of Amitabh Kanji is here from Niti Aayog, he pushed it, and during the G20 presidency, the level of engagement of those institutions to orient our youth towards this global role. How you see your own work in terms of less you preach, the more you learn. How you see this transiency in the global scenario and our students and our youth getting prepared for the changing world.
No, look, you're quite right that there are some pretty impressive universities. One could even use the word world-class without embarrassment for some of the private institutions we have, or at least some institutions within those institutions. For example, there might be a university that has a dozen schools, of which say two or three say their law school or whatever might be top class, and some of the other schools may still be having some way to go to catch up. But the truth is that is happening. I'm not disagreeing with that at all. And of course, the IITs have consistently had a worldwide reputation. Indeed, the IIT brand is now being exported. A couple of IITs have been opened abroad. So I'm not disagreeing with you that there's some of that already. But when you say, how do we prepare our children for the challenges of the world of today, there are other intangibles. First of all, there is a question of scale. We can't afford to have, as we've had for the longest time, a few islands of excellence in a sea of mediocrity. The truth is we have to bring the average up. We have to bring up those institutions, the central universities, the government universities, and the state universities for that matter, to that kind of standard, where you know that whenever you go to any college, when you see somebody having a degree in India, a certain minimal expectation is possible. That sadly is not yet there. The other thing that we have to face is the unreadiness of our educational system for the real world of the marketplace. I remember when we were in government, we had commissioned a report from Mr. Narayana Murthy on the academia-industry interface. Perhaps my friend Amitabh can tell us why it sort of sank without trace in the following 10 years. But the arguments that he made were very valid. If you look at America today, it's a very common practice for a private company to go to a university and say, listen, we've got this idea, we don't have the people to research it. Will you assign some graduate students or whatever, the postdocs, I don't know who, we'll give you the money for them to do the research, and if they come up with a product that is, that we can manufacture and market, you'll get a share of the royalties. And this is so common across the world. Silicon Valley was built on that model. The Raleigh-Durham Triangle in North Carolina was built on that model. And yet it's practically unknown in India. Why should it be? Why can't the private sector tap into the skills of our academia? I can tell you, for example, that in my time we did actually pass a rule for polytechnics, saying that no one could establish a polytechnic in India anymore unless they had a functioning industry within a 30 kilometer, 30 was very generous, but a 30-kilometer radius of the place where they were establishing it. Because we were tired of her hearing that our polytechnics were teaching out of outdated textbooks. And students were coming out and finding that nothing they'd learned was applicable in the real world. Again, I remember a study going back now a decade by Fickey and Asochan, which established that something like 82% of employers were saying that our students, those who had graduated who were available in the marketplace, were not ready for employment. 82% is a startlingly alarming figure. And it seems to cut right across the board. TCS and Infosys, for example, essentially educate the people they hire. I don't mean on-the-job training. They have a campus. Infosys is a campus, Mysore, that looks like an American university campus. And literally, after they hire the kids, then for a whole year they're being trained what they should have learned at university. Which points to the overall, I'm afraid I use the word mediocrity, but it's true, the overall mediocrity of what we are churning out by and large. And I ran an organization of the Congress Party called the All India Professionals Congress. We did a survey in Kerala of something like a few thousand, I can't remember exactly how many thousand, engineering graduates who were working in Kerala. 66% said they were doing jobs that did not require an engineering degree. So what they had studied was completely irrelevant to what the marketplace wanted from an engineer. And they ended up doing other things. Their degree was essentially wasted. So these are the kinds of things we do need to address. And there is one last thing I want to stress, which is the intangible nature of the kind of way we teach. You know, when you see the Bill Gateses and the Steve Jobs and so on, all their interviews, and they are asked sort of what exactly do you look for in people you're trying to hire, their answer inevitably is out-of-the-box thinking. Do we encourage out-of-the-box thinking, or do we actually drill into our heads, into our students' heads, the obligation to think within the box, to mug up from the textbook and churn out, regurgitate in the exam papers what they have learned? This has to change. And I've been saying this now for a dozen years in lectures to both high school teachers and college teachers. We must have an approach that actually engages the child's mind, the student's mind, I shouldn't say child anymore, many of them are young men, women, engages their minds, because the most important skill in the 21st century is not learning what to think, it's learning how to think. And that means that when you come out into the real world, and we have a very strongly exam-oriented culture, but the exam called life tends to ask you questions you couldn't mug up in a textbook or prepare for the examinations. And for that, habits of thought are far more important than how much you remember, which in any case has become largely irrelevant in the era of the internet. In the real world, any quote you can't remember, any mathematical formula you can't recall, any fact or date you want to check, within 2 seconds you get it on your mobile phone. Why would you need any more the skill that I'm proud to say I have from my years of education, of being able to recall all that off the top of my head? It's a wonderful skill at a certain time, but for the last 15 years it's been irrelevant as a skill, because you're no longer having any particular advantage over somebody who didn't study so hard in school or college, because they're getting the same information off the phone as long as they know what to ask, what to look for. Therefore, what you need is habits of thought that teach you how to relate to unfamiliar information, that tell you how you can actually approach a problem you've never encountered before and that your teacher hasn't encountered before. There was a study by the Oxford Martin School about a few years ago, I think roughly around 2020, which said that 30% of the jobs in the world by 2030 will be jobs that don't exist today, today being 2020. Well, the fact is, How can you prepare anybody for a job that doesn't exist? There is no textbook written for it, there is no material, there is no knowledge. The job itself hasn't been dreamt of, but it will be. And therefore, what you need to do is teach them how to approach problems generally, how to how to know what to look for in the essence of an issue, to distill it, to analyze it, and to come up with a clear path forward, because that'll equip them to do these jobs that don't yet exist. And by the way, the report was quite accurate, because there are a lot of jobs in the world today that didn't exist when that report came out, in domains particularly affected by AI. And so you're looking at changes moving at a dizzying pace. And if kids who have never been allowed to think, never been able to speak for themselves, never being able to argue with other students or debate or discuss, present things in classrooms, kids who have been told from school, shut up and listen to the teacher and then just repeat what the teacher says, those kids are singularly ill-equipped for the world of the 21st century. So these are amongst the intangible changes we also need to make before we can.
You're absolutely
move that
right.
forward.
I think that kind of interaction with students and enabling them to bring forward the solutions that they see of contemporary challenges that are there, trying to have some kind of exposure to field visits and also in the new kind of labs that we require. But let me draw upon Dr. Tharoor your past experience in the UN and take this conversation slightly on a broader canvas. How you see you were with the UN when Cold War was on its peak. You have seen the melting pot, and you have also seen how unipolar and then multipolar world has, in a way, affected multilateralism. This year, India is going to chair BRICS presidency. We have the BRICS presidency. We are also becoming extremely active in SCO and other regional platforms. How you see the UN reforms process that are going forward, and given your own experience with the UN, the changing regional role, the role of the China-US contestation that is there, how you view the relevant actors here and India's own role in this context.
It's a vast subject, but let me try and come up with a few essential observations. The first is that the UN still remains indispensable because it is the only organization that brings together, the only platform that brings together every country on earth on a common space. So that, you know, as Churchill famously said, jaw, jaw, which means talking, is better than war, war, which is fighting. And that's certainly true. But the concerns about the increasing ineffectiveness of the UN in its role in maintaining international peace and security have really grown dramatically in the last couple of decades. You have seen wars the UN couldn't prevent, Libya, Syria, that the UN partially almost authorized, the horrendous tragedies and violations of international law and of the UN Charter, whether it comes to the Ukraine conflict or the Gaza conflict. And so there is a feeling, what is the point of having the UN if it can't do any of this? I mean, there was a very famous statement by the Second Secretary General of the UN, Dag Hammarskjöld, in the 1950s, who said that, look, don't expect perfection from the UN. The UN was not designed to take mankind to heaven, but rather to save humanity from hell. Which meant that sometimes the best the UN could do was prevent things from getting worse. But then people can turn around today and say, how many children in Gaza did you save from hell? Or how many people in Ukraine, or whatever. And each objector can point to visible and painful failures of the UN system. And that's something to which I'll come back in a second, but let me qualify this by saying the UN has perhaps an outsized perception in the world's eyes when it comes to peace and security, but it also has many other roles. It is a major agenda setter on some of the big issues around the world. Our entire environmental consciousness was shaped by a series of UN conferences, going back to Stockholm in the 1970s and continuing through Rio and Paris and now all these COPs. You've got the UN's extraordinary ability to shape the international agenda on various other issues. And you've got the General Assembly as a meeting place of all the world's countries. Plus you've got the agencies, the humanitarian agencies for refugees, for children, the World Health Organization, the Labor Organization, many of which no one would want to see disappear. So the objections are principally to the Security Council, and there you're quite right, reform is long overdue. because the Security Council reflects the geopolitical realities of 1945 when the organization was established and not of 2025, which is where we are now finishing the calendar year today. And so to me, there is no doubt that reform is necessary, but it's also very clear it's not about to happen in a hurry, because the threshold to amend the UN Charter is deliberately very difficult. You need not only two-thirds of the member states of the UN to agree on a formula for reform, but that then needs to be ratified, and ratification is usually a parliamentary procedure, by two-thirds of the world's parliaments, including those of all 5 permanent members. And to find a formula that is simultaneously acceptable to two-thirds of the world and that is not unacceptable to the big 5, whose powers will be diluted in any reform, that formula has proved completely elusive. And so we've been going around in circles since I heard Boutros Ghali say in 1992 or 3 that he expected Security Council reform to be done and dusted by the 50th anniversary of the organization. The 50th anniversary of the organization was in 1995. 60th has gone by, 70th has gone by, and 80th has gone by, and I don't know whether Boutros Ghali's prediction is likely to be fulfilled at all.
No, thank you. I think the whole question of governance, global governance, the role that UN and the regional...
Yes, I'm sorry, you did ask that. I didn't respond to that. What is happening is, you're right, we do have these smaller groupings, what are jokingly referred to as minilaterals or plurilateral organizations. So you've got BRICS, you've got G20, you've got the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. For that matter, you have the Quad, which was supposed to have met. We have the presidency of that also this year, but Mr. Trump didn't show up, so we'll have to see when and whether that continues. Maybe in the first quarter of the year, we might actually see that 2025 Quad Summit taking place in early 26. We'll have to see. Amitabh will be talking later in this festival about India's leadership of the G20. And these are all very important forums because they involve cooperation across countries without necessarily engaging the entire world, which is in some ways useful to bypass some of the institutional bottlenecks of a more formal charter-based organization like the UN. And you're right to point to the fact that those exist. And they're they're part of our sort of multi-alignment strategy. Because when I first came up with that term 20 years ago, at which time, by the way, it's not very well received in India, since it seemed to be almost sacrilege to be saying anything other than non-alignment. But what I meant by multi-alignment was that the world is more and more like the internet. It's more like the World Wide Web, where countries are connected to each other in different ways. I may be connected to you for some purposes. You may be connected to her, but she may not be connected to me. And so all of this gives us multiple ways of trying to align with each other to work together. I often illustrate this by talking about the fact that every year the Russian, Chinese, and Indian foreign ministers are supposed to meet in something called RIC. Then we add the Brazilians and the South Africans and we get BRICS. Then we take away the Russians, but we leave the Chinese and we get BASIC for environmental negotiations. And then we take the Chinese also out, we're left with the Brazilians and South Africans in something called IPSA for South-South cooperation. And India is the only country that's in all of these different formulae, not merely because our name begins with that very indispensable element in any acronym, a vowel, but because at the same time we have something to give and something to gain from each of these formulations. And that's true of every country in their own domains. They have such arrangements. I think it's important. We've often talked about sovereign autonomy going back to independence as being a lodestar of India's thinking. After 200 years of a foreign country telling us what we stood for in the world, we were not going to let anybody else dictate to us. That's why we stayed away from alliances and we said we'll preserve our sovereign autonomy. But multi-alignment is a practical way of applying that sovereign autonomy in a turbulent world and in a world where, frankly, all the assumptions are disappearing. Every one of your traditional partnerships has now become more and more transactional. And every one of these sort of cherished ways of dealing with other countries suddenly now comes attached with an asterisk and a footnote, because Mr. Trump may change his mind, whatever the previous arrangements were, whatever the existing strategy was. And so with all of these changes, you need the flexibility that a multi-aligned approach gives you.
Dr. Tharoor, let me bring you back to Kerala. You have been Member of Parliament.
These days with the Patna fog, I would like to go back to Kerala.
So one of the MPs was telling me that Shashi ji ko kya dikkat hoti hai wahan pe? केरला में सब कुछ है. हमें पूछिए, ड्रेनेज का प्रॉब्लम है, स्कूल में टीचर नहीं है. केरला में कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं
सब
है.
कुछ है.
तो सब कुछ है. Do you really feel so? How you rate yourself as an MP, and in what way you see this whole dynamics working out for you?
Look, I mean, I don't believe in rating myself as anything. I think that's for others to judge. I have been re-elected 4 times, so I'm trusting that the voters have made their choices. But I will say that when it comes to Kerala, we are able to take for granted a lot of things that you're still struggling to achieve in Bihar, and certainly that includes pretty much universal literacy, that includes a standard of healthcare that is actually comparable in some respects better than the United States. When you look at all the indicators, number of nurses per patient, number of for patients, number of hospital beds per head of population, number of doctors, or institutions, all of these things, Kerala is actually slightly ahead of the US. When it comes to number of newspapers per head of population, we're ahead of the US. When you're looking at other social and economic indicators, Kerala does have the human development indicators of the Western developed world, but it does so on a very small fraction of the per capita income of those countries. We are not a wealthy state, oddly enough, despite all of this. We are excessively reliant on exporting our unemployment. We are not employing enough people at home. We send them to other states and to foreign countries, and their remittances come back and fuel the economy. And even then, Kerala is living on borrowed time and on borrowed money. Our government runs out of money to pay salaries by September. They have to live on loans. Where actually the Kerala government is spending more money on servicing debt than it is on development projects. So you cannot be hailed uncritically as a success story. Very many good things in the lives of ordinary people. You practically see no visible poverty. There aren't beggars on the streets, all of that stuff. And we do attract a lot of people from Bihar, by the way. Just a few years ago, the #1 ranking in the state high school Malayalam examination was won by a boy whose parents had migrated from Bihar. His father was selling chai outside Kozhikode station, and this boy, I think his name was Muhammad Mohsen or something, came first in Malayalam in the Kerala high school examination. So we are also a place where we can educate Biharis very well. I'm not trying to encourage mass migration of Biharis, but just saying that the track record is not too bad. But we need to get the macro picture much better improved. And part of the reason is that in many ways in Kerala, we acquired a sense of our rights much earlier than anywhere else. And as a result, we have the highest minimum wage in the country, the highest standards in our labor force, but we also have the most difficult and troublesome
Fiscal situation.
No, fiscal
Because I'm
situation I
quite
mentioned already.
surprised.
But we make it a very inhospitable place for investors and businesses to come, with the result that people are not coming in to invest their money in our state and generate the jobs that can only come if businesses are established.
Exactly, because
So that's something where, unfortunately, we've perfected the art of bureaucratic delays to an extent that has made it very, very unwelcoming. All that has to change.
Their interaction with the Finance Commission, the report of the Gulati Institute on Finance, I was quite surprised to see the fiscal constraints that Kerala government is going through, the amount of unemployment that is being reported. But still, of course,
We have the highest youth unemployment in the country after
Exactly.
Kashmir, which is quite startling.
and continuous stagnation in investment. Amitabh ji himself led Kerala government's tourism sector and established high benchmark for that. But I think the economic situation, the policy framework, they still require a bit of rejigging.
Absolutely. In fact, a bunch of Amitabh's colleagues have come up with a book called Beyond Cynicism, which I gave a very lavish review to quite recently in Kerala's paper, the Madhurabhumi, because I really think that it's very important for us to realize how extremely valuable it is, even for those who have worked within the system, to admit that things are not working as they should and that they need to be fixed. What is remarkably striking about this book is how they've been unsparing of their own work and that of their peers and colleagues. And I really want to see a lot more of such honesty in all our states, but certainly as an MP from Kerala, I certainly hope to amplify their concerns and my own in a number of these areas during the at least the attention that will be paid to governance in the next few months, because we have elections coming up at the end of April, is likely to be high. And certainly that's the time when we can talk about all of this.
So thank you. I think now I should open it up for floor. Probably we can take only 5 questions. My priority would be students, and if you don't mind, we take all the 5 questions in one go.
All right, then I better
Because
run.
we would have very limited time for your response. We have to close sessions sharp at 11. So we are left only with 14 minutes, and I'm already seeing lot of hands. So I would just prefer any girl student. Yes, so you are the first one. Do you have a mic there?
Good morning, everyone present here. Good morning, sir. My name is Mausum, and I am from Patna, Bihar. Sir, I have a question for you, Dr. Sashi Tharoor. So the question would be, of as you are from political background too, so do you think that literature has a responsibility, or it should be free from all the social and political obligations?
Thank you for being so precise. Just next to you on
Next.
that in that lane itself. Yeah, keep it short.
Yeah, hello, good morning, sir. Sir, I am Sai from IIT Guwahati. So, thank you so much for such a warm uh, discussions. So, my question to Dr. Tharoor, sir, that you have pointed out that 66% of engineering graduates are working out of their background. So, my question is that this is not only issue with this engineering background, this is with the other disciplines also of the education system. So, do you see this is the primary failure of students, or university colleges, or the policy making of this state? And how can you help to reduce this 66% into single digit?
Please confine to one question only.
Yeah.
Here,
Thank you, sir.
just behind you. There.
Just ask one question.
Thank you, sir. I'm Shivam Kumar from Lakhisarai district in Bihar. Um, we were talking about unreadiness for real marketplace. I'm concerned about the learners in the discipline of humanities, specifically literature students. In what ways they can be made ready for real marketplace? Generally, they romanticize their ability to think on thoughts. At the same time, they find themselves incapable of contributing in the upliftment of society, even in terms of GDP. How can we bring together economy and literature? And the student's role must not be restricted to move or to soothe. Thank you, sir.
One just behind there.
Yeah.
Namaste, sir. Myself, Animesh Aryan from BMIMS Nalanda. Sir, my question to you is that can we fit our Gurukul model in modern school? Because, sir, in Gurukul model, Bhim, Arjun, and Yudhishthir were not all given to qualify only NEET and JEE. They have given their own. Bhimbaj given us what he wants and what he could be capable of. So, can we do that Gurukul model in modern school?
Is that all? Or can
Anybody from behind there?
Anyone from behind? Ma'am is here. Yeah.
Sir, having written extensively across fiction, history, and politics, do you see literature mainly as a mirror to the society or a force that is capable of shaping social as well as political changes?
So the last one in the front here.
All right.
The girl.
This is the last one, guys. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for giving me this opportunity. So my question is from Dr. Shashi Tharoor, sir. Firstly, I'm glad to see you on the stage. And so my question is here. You are known for your formidable vocabulary, sir. Uh, I'm going to ask a very short and sweet question. Give us one word that best describes the future of women's literature in India, and one word for its biggest obstacle. As I'm doing my PhD in women emotions, I would like to answer you this question. Thank you so much.
I'm not sure I heard the second part. Could you repeat? The first is one word for women's literature in India. And the
India.
second?
And the one word for its biggest obstacle.
That's quite a lot. Which one? This?
Hi, sir. It was a pleasure hearing you. So recently, Elon Musk stated that with advent of AI, working will be optional in the future. So I just wanted to know what your views are on that. Are we heading to a times of polymath like the ancient Rooms, and we'll be discussing philosophy and all? So yeah, I wanted to know your views on that.
That's quite a lot. Question.
Quite a lot of questions, yeah. So let's start with Mosam here. I think the answer to Mosam is that literature is not literature if it follows a prescription. In other words, if you start telling writers they've got to be socially responsible, or they've got to be politically conscious, or they've got not to be politically conscious, or whatever, then I'm afraid you're no longer freeing them to create literature. I think ultimately when we speak of literature, people are writing what comes to them, what emerges from their mind, their consciousness, often in relation to what they see around them, but sometimes not. Sometimes worlds they imagine, worlds of fantasy, or worlds they research, worlds of the past. The idea about literature is it illuminates something about the human condition. And because all aspects are part of the human condition, whether it's social, political, economic, intellectual, moral, or purely personal and intimate, all of those aspects of the human condition are fair subjects for literature to delve into. So I don't really think you can prescribe. You can't tell them this you can do, this you can't do. Writers can write what they like, and whether what they write is good enough to qualify as literature, that's something the readers and the critics will have to judge. On the friend from IIT Guwahati, where is the policy-making failure in the fact that so many graduates are doing jobs unrelated to what they have studied? I think, it's difficult to blame it purely on policymakers simply because you can't often create any society or economy where there is sort of simultaneously a study of the marketplace while you're designing syllabi. Ultimately, both tend to work on their own tracks anywhere. But the flexibility that, say, the American university offers both the administrators and the students is largely absent for us. It's very easy in America for you to do courses, literally, if you're doing 8 courses a year, which is typical for an undergraduate, they can all be in completely unconnected fields to each other. So you get to explore what interests you, what you think you might care for, what appeals to you, and then eventually specialize later. The choice of what they call a major subject as opposed to a minor is something that is often left to your final year or your final 2 years in many American campuses. That flexibility we don't really have in India, where a 16, 17, maximum 18-year-old is expected already to have a good idea what they want to do in life. The second problem is when they want to go ahead in fields which are themselves evolving, our systems are too cumbersome to keep up with it. So amending a curriculum, as the Vice Chancellor will tell you, is a hugely laborious process in our country. So if suddenly some new innovations have come up, it may take a couple of years to be reflected in the curriculum, and the student who wants to enter a job in that field may not be able to learn this in the university, may have to study on his own time or outside, or learn in practice by doing on-the-job training or associating himself or herself with employers in this field. So that again becomes an issue. If we create flexibility, then we can leave it to those academic institutions that are more attuned to the marketplace to be able to respond, to react, and to provide these opportunities. And therefore, that is, to my mind, something we should seriously encourage, is much greater flexibility. NEP goes to some degree in that direction, and I'd like to see it going even more in that direction in terms of freeing up, particularly the whole idea of autonomous institutions, colleges getting the university status, getting autonomy and being allowed to issue their own degrees, will give them the flexibility to do more. But that's been very, very slow in being implemented, and that is something that worries me. Finally, how many colleges or universities bother to think in terms of the marketplace is another question. I don't know that. I know some of the, particularly these new private colleges in the business sector, the engineering sector, and so on, do have regular placement arrangements. Companies come to the campus, interview students, and so on. Very many, or the vast majority, don't. And for them, perhaps we need to encourage either state governments or employers' organizations or business organizations to conduct job placement fairs for about to be graduates to give them more opportunities. But the problem is by the time they're in a position to look for job placement, they've already finished their learning. And if they discover they haven't learned the right things, it's too late to fix. So these are not easy problems to solve, but they're very real issues. So Shubham Kumar talked about the question of, yeah, it follows from this question of unreadiness for the workplace, and he asked particularly about the humanities. Look, I'm a great fan of the humanities because I've done it myself, and I chose to do it even though throughout my schooling I'd come first in science, but I had no desire to study science at college level, and I chose the humanities. And I genuinely believe, and I've actually made a big speech about the value of liberal education, that in many